This is WAB's Week in Review with me, Alex Helmick. On this show, we look at several stories from your WABE news team over the last few days. And later in the show, we'll have more on the firing of federal workers and what that means for Atlanta, including at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. But first, Atlanta's first Inspector General is resigning after what she alleges is retaliation against her and her office's work to root out waste, fraud, and abuse at City Hall. WABE's Shemaine Cruz reported the story.
Shannon Manigault took the position at the end of 2020 after Atlanta's Office of the Inspector General was formed in the wake of a massive federal investigation over bribery, kickbacks, and misuse of city resources during Mayor Kasim Reed's tenure. But now, Manigault says she feels like she has no choice but to step down.
I have been subjected to threats, bullying, intimidation, and harassment at the hands of people who have been the subjects of our investigations. Pure and simple, it's retaliation. The attacks have been systematic, sustained, and savage.
Though she didn't name names, Manigault's announcement coincides with a federal lawsuit that was recently filed by a lobbyist who she recommended be barred from doing work with the city, and a cease and desist order from the city attorney accusing the OIG of violating state law to obtain the financial records of city employees under investigation.
I hate that it's come to this.
In an email, a spokesperson for the mayor's office said, quote, "We look forward to working with a new inspector general and independent board in the near future." Here's Atlanta resident Ricky Brown reacting to her resignation during public comment at a city council meeting just hours later.
An utter lack of accountability. And the OIG is tugging her tail now and going home after willful misconduct and after putting private citizens' financial businesses in the streets.
Later that day, the city council passed legislation limiting the OIG's subpoena power and access to city records following months of review. City council member Liliana Bakhtiari cast the only no vote. Shemaine Cruz, WABE News.
Well, a bill that would ban school zone traffic cameras in Georgia has passed out of a state House committee. While the bill has popular support, WABE's Raul Bali reported it does face a challenging legislative path.
Decatur Mayor Patty Garrett came to the state capitol to defend her city's use of traffic cameras, specifically because of the number of kids who walk to school. She thinks the cameras help drivers slow down.
We do only ticket the first hour right around the time school starts, and then the hour after school. And it's not running on weekends or holidays, or even when, like this week, our schools are out for winter break. We're not ticketing.
She and safety advocates are open to reforms. For example, setting hours for cameras to operate, mandating flashing lights, or signs that tell drivers how fast they're going, and more. But Republican State Representative Dale Washburn says his legislation to completely ban the cameras, which is backed by a majority of the House, is the only solution at this point.
I believe that the abuses that are occurring now won't necessarily stop with some fix-it plan, mostly because our citizens have no recourse if they get a citation.
Washburn also faces the challenge of key figures like House Speaker John Burns, who have talked about reforming and not banning the cameras. Raul Bali, WABE News, the state capitol.
Well, new legislation in Georgia would put more pressure on local governments to enforce bans on homeless encampments and other issues. It would allow property owners to claim a tax refund if they could show they lost value on their home because local governments failed to enforce the law. WABE's Stephanie Stokes had more.
The bill goes beyond the urban camping issue. It would also open local governments to the risk of lost revenue if they allowed loitering or panhandling, or if they don't comply with federal immigration authorities. In a brief hearing last week, the Republican sponsor, Representative Houston Gaines of Athens, promoted the bill.
Our hope is that local governments simply do their job and enforce the laws of our state and their local governments, and then no one would ever be able to utilize this.
He says the law would be similar to one approved by voters in Arizona last November. But some advocates for homeless people told state lawmakers the bill is focusing on the wrong thing. Brad Schweers is with In Town Cares, a group that does outreach for the city of Atlanta.
My problem with this bill is it doesn't address the causes of homelessness. It doesn't address the solutions to homelessness.
He said the most important fix is getting people into housing. State lawmakers plan to continue hearing from supporters and opponents of the legislation tomorrow. Stephanie Stokes, WABE News.
The mass firings of federal employees are affecting hundreds of people in Georgia, including at the Atlanta-based Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Federal workers and their supporters are pushing back on the Trump administration's cuts, and there's confusion about what's going on and what's next. WABE health reporter Jess Mador had more on the latest, and here she is speaking with WABE's Julian Virgin.
Jess, remind us of what has happened over the last week with federal workers at the CDC, and what's the latest? Because we've heard a lot of different numbers thrown around since last week.
Yeah, we have. And on Friday, as you may recall, we heard reports that almost 1,300 CDC workers were getting fired, and essentially that's about 10% of the staff at the CDC. Since then, there have been a number of different numbers being thrown around because, the agency is not speaking publicly. So the information that is coming out to us and to NPR and to other news organizations really is coming from inside the agency, people who are working there, who are risking their jobs to share information. And so those numbers have been fluctuating. We know that hundreds have happened so far at the CDC and others are expected.
You've been speaking to workers. What have you heard from them?
This is a really difficult time for people. Everyone I've spoken to has talked about just the terrible fear and anxiety and uncertainty that they're living with right now. People who have already been officially fired are just devastated. We're talking about a lot of people who are scientists, people who really are driven by the mission of public health. And, some heard last week they were going to be fired, but they still haven't received that email. So people feel like they're in limbo. They don't know what's going to happen next. I've spoken to people who are just really, really concerned about their futures. What are they going to do? They lose their jobs suddenly. Will they be able to pay their mortgages? And there was a protest the other day that included some union organizers and some federal workers and just community members who were there. And this union organizer, Sandra Lee Williams, she told me that, these workforce cuts are really taking a toll on all federal workers who are experiencing these kinds of mass firings across Georgia.
The emotional stress and strain that the employees, taxpaying citizens in this country, have had to pay in the last 25 days since the president was elected is overwhelming.
And this is all a part of Trump administration's orders to dramatically shrink the federal workforce, right? We've heard of hundreds of workers let go from the Veterans Administration, the Food and Drug Administration, the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Energy, TSA workers, and on and on. What else do we know about the workers being fired from the CDC?
The first group of employees at all federal agencies, but including the CDC, that have been targeted for these mass firings are what are called probationary workers. It includes anyone from more recent hires to even longtime veteran employees, people who have had, an internal move within the agency. Maybe they got a promotion or they moved into a different position. All of those people are included under that probationary category. We have heard that some people are being told that they're being fired because their performance was not up to par. But these are people who have paperwork showing that they've been promoted, that they have great reviews, that they've met the federal standards.
And Jess, what are Georgia lawmakers saying about this?
Georgia Democrats, including Democrats in Congress, Senators Warnock and Ossoff, and state lawmakers have been highly critical of these cuts. They're worried that cutting the CDC workforce so dramatically is really going to threaten the agency's ability to function and really roll back progress on fighting outbreaks. And this is at a time when we are always facing disease threats, bird flu, measles, flu. It's probably not a matter of if, it's a matter of when the next pandemic hits. And they're worried that will be less prepared in the U.S. On the Republican side, here's what Governor Brian Kemp had to say at a live event hosted by Politico.
I know they have some layoffs at the CDC and other things, but government can stand a little right size.
Jess, thank you for your quality reporting and bringing us up to speed.
Thank you.
Well, for more on this, go to wabe.org. You're listening to WABE's Week in Review with me, Alex Helmick. For more news, live streams, events, updates, and even more, get the revamped WABE app. Well, education researchers find students in Georgia have still not recovered academically to pre-pandemic achievement levels. A new study shows students are doing the opposite of catching up, losing more academic ground in the years since COVID-19 restrictions in schools largely ended. WAB's Melissa Fado had more.
According to the latest Education Recovery Scorecard, a project of Harvard and Stanford universities, Georgia ranks 7th in reading recovery and 29th in math recovery nationally. That means statewide students are still a third of a grade behind 2019 levels in reading and half a grade behind in math. Tom Kane is an economist at Harvard's Graduate School of Education and a lead on the project. He says a major ongoing issue parents and educators have to get under control is a jump in kids chronically missing school, a 10% rise from 2019 to 2023.
So if the pandemic was the earthquake, the rise in absenteeism sort of has been the tsunami that's been running through U.S. schools.
In Metro Atlanta, Fayette and Fulton counties have recovered enough to almost reach 2019 achievement levels in reading and math. But performance in lower income districts like Clayton County has plummeted. And increases in chronic absenteeism have grown faster in districts with higher poverty levels. To catch up, Kane says most students need more time learning.
The districts that expanded high dosage tutoring, that expanded summer learning, tended to see faster recovery.
While no state in the country is considered fully recovered, Kane says nearby Alabama has reached pre-pandemic performance in math and Louisiana in reading. Melissa Fato, WABE News.
Democratic legislators, disability advocates, and parents are saying that a move by Georgia's Attorney General Chris Carr to block a Biden administration rule could strip federal disability accommodations and protections. WABE's Mei Shu has more on the lawsuit at the center of the controversy.
Georgia is one of 17 states named as plaintiffs in a suit against the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and former Secretary Javier Becerra. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability, specifically Section 504, which the suit alleges the Biden administration unlawfully revised to categorize gender dysphoria as a disability to be protected under programs that receive federal funding. However, advocates say one count of the suit alleges the entire Section 504 is unconstitutional, which they argue could jeopardize established standards for disabled people. Jenny Bell is a middle school teacher and a parent in the Atlanta metro area.
These accommodations do not cost the taxpayers millions of dollars. These protections promote equitable access to education.
A spokesperson for the Attorney General said the lawsuit would not affect Georgia's existing 504 disability program and is only meant to block the rule classifying gender dysphoria as a disability. Democratic State Representative Jasmine Clark said this lawsuit coincides with recent nationwide efforts to ban diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives.
There have been things in place in our society that we thought were established law and established protections that are now gone. So in that context, we have to take the words written on the paper very seriously.
Advocates want Georgia out of the lawsuit. The case has been stayed, but states' attorneys general and defendants need to provide an update on how they will proceed by next week. Mei Shu, WABE News.
And finally today, Atlanta's Habitat for Humanity is looking for a new type of project around the metro Atlanta area. WABE's Dormaya Vance looked into how the nonprofit is responding to the rising demand for housing.
Habitat for Humanity is known for building single-family homes one at a time over the organization's 40-plus years of operations. But recently in Metro Atlanta, land has become scarce and expensive, according to the local Habitat CEO, Rosalind Merrick.
That has to drive a strategy around, okay, well, if there's less land that we can access, then we have to be really ever more intentional about the best possible use for that land. And one of the strategies is higher density.
In this case, higher density means more homes with less square footage on plots of land. Think townhomes, for example. Habitat tried out this new larger project approach in some areas south of Interstate 20, including South Atlanta's Browns Mill Village and Lovejoy's Hannah Springs. Here's the Vice President of Habitat for Humanity International, Adrian Goolsby.
When looking at large-scale development, it allows you to invest in a way where you can leverage your dollars more efficiently.
Habitat officials say these neighborhood developments aim to create more homeowners within underserved communities. In 2023, the Atlanta Regional Commission reported that Black and Hispanic families' ownership rates were about 55% compared to white families, which were at nearly 80%. Here's Merrick again.
But these are individuals who contribute so much to our economy and the fabric of our communities. And so it's really important to not lose sight of their families' need, deserve, an opportunity to create wealth building of legacy.
Officials with Habitat say they hope these higher density neighborhoods will support even more families and foster a new sense of community. Dormaya Vance, WABE News.
That's all for the show this week. My thanks to the entire WABE News team. Great work. For more, go to WABE.org or get the WABE app. I'm Alex Helmick. Thank you for supporting WABE and for listening to the Week in Review.